Welcome to your Artsy Girl podcast. I am your host, Christina Carrere. This is a podcast about art, poetry, writing, and anything about creativity. Sit back, relax, and get your dose of brain food to get your creative juices flowing. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 60th episode of your Artsy Girl podcast. Today's featured guest is Clinnesha D. Sibley. She is a native of Macomb, Mississippi. She is a published author, community leader, and educator. She promotes creative mindedness, believing that visual, performing, and literary arts can change the way we think about some of life's most important questions. A writer of plays, poetry, prose, essays, and creative nonfiction, Clinnesha has received numerous awards, including the Holland New Voices Award, the Arkansas Arts Council Individual Artist Fellowship, and the Mississippi Theater Association Adult Playwriting Award. Her writing has also appeared in national literary journals, anthologies, and various publications, and anthologies including Fields Blind Literary, Quince Magazine, In Full Color, Black Masks Magazine, and Muzzle Magazine. Clinnesha committed to training exclusively as a playwright while attending Tougaloo College in Jackson, Mississippi. As an interdisciplinary career-oriented humanities major, she learned to focus inward, exploring identity, psyche, and the human condition. After teaching on the college, university level for many years, Clinnesha decided to move into secondary residential education and is currently the literary arts instructor at Mississippi School of Arts, where she teaches young writers to become socially engaged artists. Clinnesha is married to her high school sweetheart, Keith Sibley, and they have 3 beautiful children, Kaylee, Carly, and Keith Jr. Everyone, please welcome my next featured guest, Clinnesha D. Sibley. Hi, Clinnesha. Thank you for coming on the show. How are you today?
I'm well, and I'm excited to be on your show, Christina. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So how did you find your Artsy Girl podcast?
Oh, goodness. I believe it was a submission opportunity of, something just to connect with you. And maybe I found that on Submittable, one day. Yeah. So
good. I just started the Submittable account, and I'm so glad I've got a few replies just like yourself. And for the audience who are interested to submit in the future, if you just go on to your artsygirlpodcast.com on the top menu, it'll say want to be a featured guest. You click on that and go into Submittable and submit your work and your bio, just like Clinnesha did. So glad to have you on. Before we get into what you do, please tell the audience where you're from and where you grew up.
I am from a small city in southwest Mississippi called Macomb. We all know about the history of segregation, discrimination, and racial injustice in Mississippi. And for me, growing up in the 80s and 90s in the city of Macomb, there were still lots of challenges and adversity steeped in race relations of the 60s, which, the 60s was a very fertile time for civil rights activities. So my hometown, just a quick background, my hometown in 1964 was known as the bomb capital of the world. Wow. So if you were Black and involved in any type of civil rights activities, such as voter registration drives, protests, or any kind of meaningful demonstrations, you were considered a threat and targeted by whites. If you were Black and progressive at all, you were targeted. My family was targeted. Macomb is a place, though, that I feel accountable to as an artist and a writer and an involved community member. I grew up here. I left and went away to study and to grow and to experience. And I came back full circle with my own family. So I have to add that Macomb is also where I met my husband, who is my high school sweetheart. And we have 3 beautiful children together. So now I don't know, I feel a sense of, responsibility to this place that I feel like I know from the inside out.
So can you tell us briefly, how is it today there living there? especially after, like, the George Floyd riots?
There's some awareness. There's also still some resistance,
Mm-hmm.
and we for the first time in Macomb's history, we had a march for racial healing, a couple weeks after the George Floyd killing, and so I'll say, I do think that the George Floyd killing was such an awakening, in the same way the death of Emmett Till was an awakening,
Right.
And sometimes, there's such a time where something awakens the masses, and I feel like living in Macomb during that time, I was able to see a shaking that I wouldn't have been attentive to as a kid growing up in Macomb. So I did see an awareness happen, and there were Black Lives Matter. There was a support of Black Lives Matter in my hometown that I found so surprising that it was almost scary, So something did happen. There was something, an awakening in Macomb after the George Floyd killing. But we are still seeing. But that was an awakening. But there was still so much resistance to, the taking down of Confederate monuments and changing our state flag.
Mm-hmm.
So it was almost like, I'm going to choose to rise up in this area, but, don't take me full out of my comfort almost. So there's still some residual race relations, even in the wake of George Floyd and all of the other Black people that have lost their lives at the hands of racist police. So,
how did you become a writer?
Oh my goodness. I had a pretty big creative spark when I was 7 or 8 years old. One summer, most kids would have called it boredom, right? But I hand wrote a play called The Littering Bunny Rabbits.
Oh.
And we performed it in the living room. Writing for me back then was simple, but still my activist eye was somehow there, because again, I'm trying to raise consciousness about littering at 7 and 8. But it was simple. The whole process of writing was simple. It was a matter of using your imagination. It was pure, and I fell in love with storytelling.
Did you come from a strong storytelling family that embraces the arts or anything like that?
I came from a strong storytelling family and citizen artists who did not identify as artists.
Right.
We did not have a lot of exposure to the arts here, and that that was one of the things that we just weren't resourceful in we didn't have an arts community. Right. So there were no resources there.
Can you tell the audience then, you started young as a writer, and so it progressed into, and then you went to college?
Yeah. And it's interesting because, we're talking about Mississippi and my small town, which was very rich with stories and very soulful, but, just not many opportunities and resources. Well, the same thing happened when I went to college. There was this amazing HBCU in Jackson called Tougaloo College, where I sort of followed in the footsteps of my sister there. But again, there really wasn't a major there that I could, confidently select because, hey, I'm an artist, right? So I knew I wasn't really a visual artist, and I knew that, music was something that I that I did gravitate to, but I guess there was a well-rounded major that I discovered at Tougaloo called it was an interdisciplinary humanities major. That's short for interdisciplinary career-oriented humanities.
Okay.
And I would say maybe my sophomore year, I found myself gravitating to that particular department, and it was through that academic experience that I started looking into the complexities of the human condition. And, I felt, philosophically ready to amp up my writing a little bit. And that was a big step from when I was playing pretend with my sister and, staring out of the window and studying characters in movies and TV shows.
Yeah.
I went from purity as a writer, from the purest eye, to being super introspective about everything, you know. But at Tougaloo, I was able to really get the same kind of nurturing and support that I got on the home front, because my parents, thank goodness, they noticed the passion, and they made sure that, I spoke at events and that I read my poetry at events. And, they helped me to publish a book of poetry at 12 and again at 16. Wow. And actually, playwriting, which really kind of became, my cornerstone as a writer, although poetry was my first love, I really found that playwriting was the thing I loved to write most. That was just the genre I found myself having the most fun in. And so my parents made sure that I put up, they helped me to be able to put up work in the local theater that we had in Macomb. And then my mentors at Tougaloo were able to provide opportunities for me to produce plays at the college.
Wow.
So I was not only writing, but I was also becoming a producer, producing work, directing work. So there was a lot of, self-made things happening, mm-hmm. I just think writing was something that came naturally to me, and it became my path and my portal to venture out of Macomb and go to Tougaloo College and then to the University of Arkansas for grad school.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So did you find that finding out that you're writing actually is becoming almost another dimension, because now that not only is your writing on the paper, but now you're seeing it being enacted live, with actors and everything like that. I think that is truly amazing with playwright. I read your poem, something, a tribute to Ntozake Shange.
Yeah.
Are you going to read that for us today?
I surely can.
Okay.
I can totally read that to you.
All right. So without further ado, if you can read a few poems, and then I'll ask you a few more questions about them.
Sure. Okay. This is a love letter to Ntozake. You played Barbies and watched as little boys gawked at Cindy Crawford in a Pepsi commercial. Your teacher suggested the Babysitters Club, Kristy's great idea for your book project, because it was heartwarming, not controversial like the Bluest Eye. You watched the Cosby Show and you knew that you wanted to be that kind of Black. You were eating grandma's field peas and okra when you got your period. Mama was working, stayed working. Your body changed immediately and grandma gave you a girdle. Same kind of girdle she gave your mama. You stayed looking in the mirror, hoping your ass would catch up with your chest and hips. It never did, not on its own. Sophomore year, he let you wear his Letterman. It was warm and smelled like November. He never let anyone but you wear his Letterman. He told you he loved you. You didn't know a man could ever do that. He would take back the number 7 when y'all hated one another. Back and forth, The jacket began to smell less like autumn and more like alcohol and meat. You were in the McDonald's bathroom when you got one line in a faint. You cried into your chicken nuggets. You told your best friend and her mama, who's cool. Then cool mama told you about Mrs. Poole. He said he would come too. He lied. But he brought you something to eat afterwards.
Wow, I love that poem. And you have a couple more?
I do.
Okay.
That was abbreviated. There's a longer version of Ntozake that was in a abbreviated version, but there are a couple more that I am excited to share. Okay, so this is a free verse poem called Navigating Her.
Mm-hmm.
Contrary to popular belief, she did not wake up like this. She is still waiting in her destiny, swimming fiercely toward manifestation, often rowing through towering walls of water, also known as tears. She doesn't always wake up like this, not feeling like a merchant ship, bringing food from afar, not always anchored. Most often, she is coasting, and sometimes she wakes up like an armada, surveying the damage from a harrowing war of words. But she learns how to sail safely in the storm without drowning in emotions. Sometimes she wakes up a lifeboat, having saved children from monster nightmares and bedwetting mishaps, on to work, where in the absence of her, everything falls to the lowest layer of the ocean. And then there are raft mornings when all she can do is cherish the basics. Like the warmth of coffee on her tongue, she sips while going 8 miles over the speed limit, full force toward her treasure, driven by powerful mother currents and sister winds, watching constantly for pink waves, stress signals, and lighthouses. A boat becomes a ship when it carries other boats.
Love the water imagery. Love it.
Thank you.
Nautical imagery.
Yeah.
So can you give me I kind of figure what the premise of these poems, but can you just in brief give like your philosophy?
Yeah. My premise, my main premise before, which I tapped into in my early adulthood, was just, the complexity of the human condition and definitely the Black experience, past and present. I almost always, write from the soul and lens of the Black woman. My earliest influence was Maya Angelou, which is why I believe poetry is my first love in my native language. Maya Angelou and members of my family, particularly my dad, who is the best storyteller in my personal world, my immediate world. My grandfathers and uncles were all great storytellers. What's interesting is the women in my family who were equally, if not more, great. In hindsight, I don't think they ever had enough voice and agency to tell their stories, not in the way the men in our family did. And my family members were also local civil rights activists, and all of that ushered me into social justice topics. So, I've also have grown to really lean into the Harlem Renaissance movement and the civil rights movement and the Black arts movement. And I have found that the writings of Langston Hughes, James Baldwin, Nikki Giovanni, Amiri Baraka, Audre Lorde, Ntozake Shange, of course, Lorraine Hansberry, August Wilson, like that's my canon. That's my canon. Yeah. And so, when I think about my foundation, my premise, and my purpose, all of that it's steeped in all of that.
Well, I think that by reading your poems and hearing you read them, I gather that you actually depict the Black woman vulnerabilities. You know, the same trope that, oh, Black women are strong, have to be strong, but you also kind of shed the reality of the vulnerabilities as well, which I think is very beautiful and powerful.
Yes, vulnerability is so important. It is actually, the ultimate strength.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it leads me. Actually, that's what I sort of follow. And anything that I write is the vulnerable chord. Where's vulnerability leading you today?
Right. And your poem, Ntozake, the poem to Ntozake, it really tells that, I like the way you mentioned Cindy Crawford and all that, all the media and everything that says you have to be some kind of way,
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. This sort of standard, European standard of beauty. And even if we were to get into how that, plays into how people approach their writing, and the standard of writing and what it has to, what it looks like and what all craft entails, and even those writers that I find myself, I find myself in the canon with those writers that I mentioned, all of those people were really passionate about other forms, and breaking into, different styles, Afrocentric driven writing, and it's really where I find myself. It's my happy place and my amen corner when I am in process.
Right. So what kind of advice would you give to, say, another young writer who is 7 or 8 or even going through college? What kind of advice would you give them?
Be authentic in your work. Stay inspired. Know that you are loved. Have discipline. Honor the people and places that made it possible for you. And for the writers who are servant leaders, be an amplifier for those who feel like they had no voice. I would tell them to be brave, submit your work, absolutely submit your work. That's an act of bravery, but don't be afraid to self-publish either and discover all the creative outlets that are out there. We're in a time where our creative futures are dependent on innovative practices.
Right.
So, do what you can to stay humanly connected with one another, because when it comes to the purest inspiration for writers, it's observing people. And right now we have to stay away from people. But therein lies an opportunity. Anytime there's an obstacle, anytime, there is anguish, and confusion, you have to go to the paper. You have to find the cursor and just type.
I believe that artists and writers are finding more connections now. Ironically enough, and I have quite a few submissions now, and I'm glad, because I want to learn more about who is creating out there. What is down the pike for you? Are you working on a new collection or a play? A play?
I am. Well. And again, it was, the pandemic has been a curse and a blessing. And one of the blessings is that since March, I've really taken advantage of time I have written, I've written so much. I have even, gotten back into a healthy practice of submitting work.
Good.
I am working on a new play. It's called Press, and it's something that I have been wanting to write since I was a teenager. It's so funny how the conversation is coming back full circle. I love when that happens. But the play is set in my hometown, and it's I talked a little bit about my family and being targeted and that kind of thing, but that was because we had a family business, a dry cleaning business. And the family dry cleaning business is sort of the anchor for this new play. And so it takes place in this dry cleaning business, and I think that right now it might be in the genre of magical realism.
Okay.
It plays with time a little bit, and we're both in the 90s and also in the 60s. So it is very much the tribute to my family in a way, and so I'm working on that. And I am also a blogger. And I blog on Sundays. My blog is called Serenity Sundays through thewriteaddiction.com. And I'm planning on doing some interesting things around my life writing also. I don't know if that is going to come in the form of a book or what, but I'm doing a lot in the genre of life writing as well. So.
Wow. Okay. Well, you definitely have to keep in touch and let me know, how you're doing with those, especially when you produce or publish them. I mean, the play sounds wonderful, and I'm a sucker for magical realism.
Awesome. Yes, I am too. It's fun. I think a lot of my plays are like that, but thank you. I'll definitely keep in touch.
Where can people, I know you mentioned your blog. Do you have a website or Instagram or anything?
I do. Let's see, I'm on Facebook. You can look me up by my name, Clinnesha D. Sibley on Facebook. On Instagram, I am at Clinnesha Writes. There is my blog on thewriteaddiction.com called Serenity Sunday, and I'm a part of an awesome blog community. A lot of great writers on there. I think, and yes, my website is, I guess my profile is kind of connected to my nonprofit website. My nonprofit website is smice.strikingly.com. SMICE is short for Southwest Mississippi Multiplex for Early Innovative Intervention Studies. Our work is we do work locally in Macomb, and so I'm profiled on there, but it really shows how the literary artist in me is also connected to the work that I do in the community. Absolutely. And just in general Google searches, just to kind of pull up some of the publications and things like that.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and post some of those links up there too, so the audience can check you out.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for taking the time to, chat with me. And I'm so glad to learn more about you.
Yes, I appreciate it so much. And it was so wonderful to meet you. And I love your podcast. I've listened to several episodes. And
great.
I love what you're doing. It's very inspiring. And just encouraging people to be creative. I love it.
Thank you so much. Clinnesha, it's been great talking to you, and I wish you the very best. Please stay in touch, okay?
Thanks, Christina.
Well, everyone, that is it for now. Please tune in next week for my next featured guest. In the meantime, have a productive and creative week. Bye, Clinnesha.
Bye.